Good evening, everyone. My name is Leonard Terry, and you are listening to the DVD commentary track for my 2021 documentary film, D.N.K. As we listen here to the end of the opening credit music. The first question I'm always asked when the movie screens at festivals is, of course, how did you come to choose this topic? And it's very simple, really. The Droitwich scares me. That's as honest a thing as I can say. After all the stories I've heard as a filmmaker over 20 years about strange happenings and events that people have told me about, traveling all over and even witnessing some disturbing things, it's none of that scares me. But the Droitwich does. It's the Droitwich I think about whenever I have to walk across an empty parking lot to my car late at night, or whenever I get just a little far out on the nature trail near my house in Suffolk County, New York, and the light begins to fade. It took almost a year of off and on efforts to get everyone in this film to agree to go on camera, so there was research that never seemed to end. And then finally in November of 2019, things finally fell into place. We see here the first scene. I wanted to open the film with my drive to see this man, Donald Kokoschka, because it was the opportunity to open it with just a little levity. There's an absurdist element to this for me. I'd been warned by the attorney for Triad Packed Pictures that Kokoschka was likely to pull a reversal on us. He was apparently an unpleasant man before the Saturday Ministry incident, and it made him even colder. But of course I had to try, since he was one of only 4 survivors of that day, easily the oldest. No matter his attitude, we had to try. And I wanted to show just how far we had to drive into South Jersey to get to him. And this, of course, is all real. I told my camera person, Trish Wilkins, to just follow me up onto the porch here and capture everything. And when Donald Kokoschka opened the door, we have this drama here. We agreed to every part of
I never signed anything with you. So what you do is take that camera and you send it right to hell. And if you ever call me again, I'll take you to court.
That's fine. We're not putting you under any obligation to share anything that you don't want to.
You did put me under obligation by calling me.
It wasn't just, we called pretty much everyone we could.
If I have to pick up the phone and hear that word even one time from your mouth, you're obligating me. I guess you're too dense to figure that out.
I do love that thing he says about sending the camera to hell. I was really more stunned than anything else that he had drawn us out there with the promise of telling his story, only to kick us out before we even got inside. I don't mind being called, and here that line is right here, I didn't mind being called a Hollywood ghoul trying to profit from tragedy, because I've been called that before. But that was a hell of a long drive, like 2 hours. So we do not get to hear Mr. Kokoschka's account of what happened that day in 2002. So then we move on to Noah DiLeo. He was the first one to agree to cooperate with us and go on camera. At the time of this interview, which begins here, he was working for Travelers Insurance in their IT department. I was really surprised by how young he looked. I actually had to do the math in my head. I almost thought I had the wrong Noah DiLeo for a second. He had just turned 17 when the Droitwich came. Very nice guy. His interview took about 2 days, of which we only see about 9 minutes in the finished film. Now, what you can't tell from the interviews on the screen is that I had been coached very well by a psychologist, Dr. Elizabeth Calvo, about how to talk to survivors of catastrophe. I'd done it before for my doctoral film project, and I debauched it. Noah had just been promoted at work the day before we began. He had ordered this shirt he has on here, special. Our DP was not a fan of the pattern. He gave me the stare of death. But we didn't say anything to Noah. Here we have Noah and I going back and forth about this seemingly insignificant detail about the weather on April 27, 2002, whether it rained a little or not. An anecdote that didn't make it into the final cut was about how he had been put in charge of the refreshments that day for the Saturday ministry meeting by one of the counselors, which had been a very big deal for him. He took it very seriously, and he was worried about the food getting wet, bringing it into the building from Maeve Tavares' station wagon. But I did want to show how memories differ so greatly. There are so many conflicting reports about even something like the weather on April 27th. When I first mentioned Lisa Whitelaw to him here, that's the very first time I'd mentioned her name to him, even when we were arranging these interviews. And I thought I might get some kind of reaction here, but no, you can see his reaction is just simple fondness about hearing the name again. A lot of people who see the movie are really moved by this little story he tells of how it was his first date, and then he sort of wound up accidentally asking Lisa on it one day at church because she essentially misheard him. There were too many people standing around talking at once, and the next thing he knew, he had a date with this beautiful girl. But it really was an adorable date, as you hear him describe here, like something out of a teen coming-of-age movie, even more G-rated than a John Hughes, where Noah took the bus across town from one direction and Lisa took one from the other, and they just talked about the movie afterwards in the lobby and bought another tub of popcorn because they didn't really know what to do then. They were such good kids, well-behaved by every account. And then I like the part where he says he missed the bus home because he was so nervous. And they didn't see each other again till the morning of the 27th, 2 days later, when it all happened. We cut here for somewhat dramatic effect. This diagram you see here of the annex where the Saturday ministry used to meet, which is connected to Proud Lake Baptist, was done by my assistant Ben. I wanted to get the viewer inside that building mentally as soon as possible and always thinking about it while watching the movie. So despite the fact that I'd already asked Noah many questions about that day, the first significant one you hear me speak in the film is this one, where he and Lisa found themselves in the moment when the Droitwich came. He doesn't go much into it here, but this was a common motif of the meetings of the Saturday ministry, which had about 20 people from town in 2002, a mix of adults and teenagers. They would meet Saturday mornings in spring and summer and go about the business of helping the church in whatever way was on the docket. I don't get, how did you wind up on opposite sides of the building?
Well, we got split into two groups, and both groups had a problem to solve. We had to figure out how to get more seniors involved in the church. That was my group. And the group Lisa was in had something to do with beautifying the nursery school part. There was a garden back there, I think. That was going to be the first half of the day, the problem solving. And then we'd get together, talk about it, chow down.
And that part never happened because...
Right.
But did the groups always have to go to completely opposite parts of the building?
No, that was different that day. We usually just went next door, but there was some kind of painting going on that weekend. So the whole annex was kind of a mess. So I looked up, and Lisa was heading out the door with 7 or 8 other people. I waved goodbye, but she didn't see me.
There was no room for it in the film, but the day that Mavis Morley, my producer, and I went to Proud Lake Baptist for the first time, it really was a revelation visually, and it so demonstrated why you really need, as a filmmaker, to go to a place instead of just pouring through archival photos and videos. It jumped out how Proud Lake Baptist's complex was basically the shape of a blocky letter C, like a square with one side, the east side, open. So what happened was Noah DiLeo was on one side at 10:20 a.m., and across the grassy little quad, Lisa Whitelaw was on the other side. There are big windows running all along, wrapping all the way around. So Noah could actually look across and see the room where she and the other people from group number 2 were in if he wanted. I mean, the place had to be rebuilt, but the layout remained exactly the same. So he would have seen so much, especially if it was overcast and the sun wasn't creating a lot of shadows. We actually tested that. And then you can see right away in the slow pan across the street how far away 120 Cherry Road is. Rand Street beside it is really wide, but reading the various accounts of April 27 and even seeing the news footage made it seem like the buildings were right up against each other. That just wasn't true. The street is wide. It's always been wide. And there's a parking lot that had to be crossed the same way it's shown here in the film. That hasn't changed in really 18 years. Yet only one person saw the actual crossing of the Droitwich from 120 Cherry to Proud Lake Baptist. Only one person, nobody else, say, in a car going past, nobody else saw that movement except Yuko Aratama, which is incredible. And that really made it sink in for us, just how fast everything happened.
Hello and welcome to Atlas, New Jersey. If you've ever thought that the quiet and comfort of small-town living couldn't go hand in hand with the benefits of city life, think again. Year after year, Atlas is voted one of the state's best places to live, and I'll show you all the reasons why in this video. I should know. I'm the mayor.
The mayor, Lee Cosmatos, is the director of the Atlas Community Playhouse now. Her political career was not long. Which leads us to Bill Savoy, the original owner of the building at 120 Cherry Road. The interviews with him were done in this ugly little break room here inside the train station where he works now. You can actually see an Amtrak go by at one point later. And remember, this is a guy who, back in 2002, was worth something like $5 million. And it really is all gone, I assure you. The civil suits against him took everything he had. Something else that is not shown in D.N.K. is the difference in appearance that Bill underwent between 2002 and 2020 when we shot this, which is striking. Photographs couldn't quite capture it. It's like he aged 35 years instead of 18. This real estate crookedness that he's talking about here, that he was engaging in at the time of the Saturday Ministry incident, does have a name, actually. It's called bullfighting. The more 120 Cherry fell apart, the more it would actually benefit Bill's company financially because it put pressure on the developers to give them a good price before the county stepped in and ruined a deal. So what a dubious landlord will do is he'll do the absolute minimum of repairs and just let a building fall apart physically, which in the case of 120 Cherry had been going on for about 5 years, to the point where it was barely passing inspections, but it wasn't costing Bill anything. By playing the long game, the landlord just sits back and watches the value of the land go up. There's no financial incentive to do upkeep as long as he knows the land is getting more and more valuable. I got a lot of mail when the documentary was released saying, how can you put this man on screen? Why does he get to tell his story just like the real survivors of that day, the actual heroes, even after he was found liable? But you can see even on the screen here, I think, his regret and his shame. It was like rust on his spirit. We found out that he never even challenged any of the lawsuits against him. He agreed to every term outright. So to me, it's a case of people needing a convenient villain. I know the courts might eventually have said, yeah, the conditions at 120 contributed to what happened, but were the conditions in there really so perfect that it was the only place around the...
I think so, yeah. It was a very specific set of conditions, or so I was told.
If your name comes back into public discussion because of this film...
That's okay, because what I want to give you is a confession. I want to make it totally clear that I accept blame for my part of it.
What was your relation to Maeve Tavares?
She was my spiritual counselor, basically. Okay, so here's Mary Neary, kind of the heart of the story for me, the heart of the documentary. I had tried to persuade her via email to talk to me for about 10 months, no dice, and then one morning she called me on her cell. She was lying in the back seat of her car at a rest stop just down the road from her house. She was still a little drunk from the night before.
She had to drag herself to work with a hangover. She taught 5th grade. Her school closed early the day before so the staff could attend the funeral of a student who drowned. It seems like that had triggered some really bad stuff in her. She told me very frankly she just really needed the money. She was facing foreclosure. So once that payment to her was approved, we had all the survivors. Mary was the one I was really worried about psychologically. She's a very polite woman, calm. She lived in this little house where we did the interview. She liked to take artwork she found in thrift stores and make jigsaw puzzles out of it, give those away as presents. She was only 34 when the film was made, but you can see on the screen, and it's not just the iffy lighting in her kitchen. She seems a fair bit older. Made no secret of her drinking, made no secret that she was bored, lonely, and carrying around a tremendous case of survivor guilt. She was 16 when the incident happened. It had happened about 3 miles from where she was living when we filmed. On that first day with Mary, we had to go through more territory than I wanted to because really I was just worried she wasn't going to last through many more rounds of this. So by day's end, I was kind of wiped out. I guess I'll compare it to when you're driving in a heavy snowfall, leaning forward and your focus and your worry are so acute minute after minute that when you finally get to your driveway, you feel beaten up. You've got that tension headache. That's what it was like interviewing Mary. Here now is a photo of Maeve Tavares. She was the one who told Mary at about 10:15 in the room there that she was going to run down the road and pick up one of the adults who hadn't been able to get a lift to Proud Baptist. Just go get in her car and come right back in maybe 20 minutes. And she left the room, and she never actually got out of the building. The doors on that side melted about 60 seconds later. That's where they found her. But they needed dental records to make the identification. I get that you didn't see the moment of entry, but do you recall anything about the sounds? When it first became obvious that something really bad was happening, the sounds from the hallway?
Yeah, Velcro. When you undo a piece of Velcro, you ever have Velcro shoes as a kid? What that sounds like?
Sure.
That's what it sounded like when it broke into the room. It kind of wet and just incredibly loud. That's what it sounded like.
This conversation was the first hour we spoke. You can see how defensive her body language is, very coiled, sitting very upright. Just off screen to her right, very strategically eliminated from the frame, is a bottle of scotch, which she kept nearby. She kept drinking from it little by little over the course of 3 hours. You'd never know it. The level just kept going down and down. Noah was telling me about your date, your accidental date that he accidentally asked you out on.
He was super sweet.
You two didn't really keep in touch so much beyond, a year after the incident?
No.
Different schools, I guess?
Just wasn't meant to be.
Went to see a movie, right? And finally, the last survivor of the Saturday Ministry incident, Lisa Whitelaw, still has that very all-American look 18 years after the incident. We didn't mean for her hair to look so blonde and radiant on film with the light coming through that window behind her. It just happened. This discussion of movie popcorn we have here just went on and on because I wasn't sure how to seg into her memories of the day of the disaster. It started when I asked her about seeing the movie with Noah 2 nights before, and off we went in a very friendly way about our preferences in movie theater popcorn, which was a nice way to interview her, but it didn't exactly lead to stirring cinema, so all that was snipped.
We wanted to sort of visually set down a track to reconstruct the creature's movements from the street all the way through the building. And we weren't sure how we were going to do it, so I brought this big canvas bag full of my son's blocks. Each one was about 6 inches around. We spent an hour lining them up in one long path. And in the morning, I put them back in the bag and took them home. Gave them back to Christopher. No explanation. I don't think I ever told him what we did.
None of the survivors we show in D.N.K, excluding Donald Kokoschka, lived more than 15 miles from Proud Lake Baptist, even 18 years later. When we first arrived in town, I'd never been there. We came by car, myself, Ben, and Mavis. It was a very gray day. It was so gray, we had the headlights on even though it wasn't raining. And I could feel something as we passed the sign on the side of the road that says, "Welcome to Atlas," with the Elks logo and such. I felt this weird negative energy sort of creep up my spine, a totally psychosomatic thing. But in that moment, I wondered, my God, why do these people still live anywhere near here? Atlas lost about 10% of its population in the 3 years after what happened in 2002, completely opposite of the trend of all the surrounding towns. But these people did not leave. Dr. Calvo also reminded me, she said, if you can, try not to say the word for the thing that attacked. Use the word it when you can. It will make it easier for them. So you can see me trying to do that in these interviews as best as I could, but there are times when it doesn't sound natural at all. I think that when Donald Kokoschka made a reference to that one word, I think that's probably what he was talking about.
Was there ever really any time to think about anyone else, like the police coming or someone coming from another part of the building, or were you just reacting frantically to what was happening? It wasn't like, oh, if I can hang on, cower down, maybe someone will come.
I don't remember any conscious thought about anything.
But Noah did come before the police coordinated and made their move.
Yeah. I think someone else did try, but it killed him.
Would you say Noah saved your life?
Absolutely, he did. How's he doing?
Now here is this extraordinary footage. This is the kind of thing Hollywood can never recreate. This grainy handheld video from the night after the attack. This isn't a police video. This is the video an insurance investigator took. And it's going to take us into the building at 120 Cherry Road, just across Rand Street from Proud Lake Baptist. And I don't know why this video was taken at night. I think they probably wanted to show how dark it would have been in there and how the lights weren't working. You just saw the crack in the west exterior wall there as the camera person moved past it. It was still a while before they understood the significance of the crack. A vermin inspector had removed a scaffolding that was sort of temporarily sealing it, and nobody had replaced it. It was that simple, how something could have gotten into and through that space with nobody seeing. Now here you can see how dark this first floor area is. No emergency lights are on, even though the light mounted on this person's camera sometimes spots the housing where those lights are. Again, if only those exit lights had been on, there would not have been this state of utter darkness. And maybe that alone would have been enough to make the environment inside this big empty building undesirable. Bill Savoy remembers being forced when he was 28 to watch this footage by some attorney who apparently said to him, "You created a home for that thing." We're in a small boiler room here, I guess you'd call it, and then the camera moves into this flight of stairs. In this footage, we will see the camera go through 2 doors, and someone at Sundance said to me after a screening, well, how did the Drodich get to the 5th floor, the top floor, through those doors? But as you just saw, it was a simple push bar mechanism that anyone or anything could figure out fast enough. Now we're on the 5th floor. The camera pans here, just like the director of a narrative film would do, even though this is just an insurance document, really. We take in totally empty space in all directions, cement floor. You can see how attractive this environment would have been. And then the final piece in the puzzle maybe was this standing water all over that had been leaking into the roof. It was never proven that the storm 6 nights earlier had caused this leak. It was judged more likely than not that it did. So maybe if that storm had never happened, and there was no available sustaining water source, the attack would never have occurred. What is so striking about all this footage to me is that you never hear anyone behind the camera. So it was likely just one person alone in this building at night, documenting all these little bits of evidence of neglect, walking through the dark with this light mounted on the camera. I don't think anyone knows who the camera person was. The camera just sort of wanders through the dark here. There's so much space, no junked furniture or anything. It was a floor that was never used. And here the mounted light will go out for just a moment, and you see the reddish night sky through that window near where the water had been collecting on the floor. And that ambient light in the sky, when this was taken, would actually have been coming from the beacons the emergency crews had set up to clean up the wreckage of Proud Lake Baptist next door, about 36 hours after the attack. Mary again. This was maybe the hardest stretch of her interview.
You never thought about moving away some other town?
It's hard to start over somewhere else. We don't know anybody. You have to find a job.
Can you talk about the sort of geography of your last position inside the gym before they found you?
I'd call it more of a rec room. There was a little bit of fitness equipment in there, but not much.
Yeah, sorry, inaccurate word. Here on this map here, on the left there's another classroom. It's technically closer. You didn't run for that? Was it closed?
The rec room was just the first place Mary saw. It wasn't even the flip of a coin for her. It was just seeing a door in the chaos, and she went for it. She wasn't following anybody, and nobody was following her. She assumed everyone was dead who didn't go back down the other way, down the hallway. She told me she saw about 6 or 7 people running. I got very confused here by the logistics of that moment, but I didn't want to press her on that. What I've always assumed is that she was in that spot I was pointing to on the map on the screen there, and the people she saw were on the other side of the Droitwich, and the Droitwich was between them, so she was totally cut off from them. No real hope. Now, we cut away here because Mary blacked out. We panicked. She was out for about 30 seconds, just blacked out in her chair right at the end of a sentence, and when she came around, she told us that this just happens sometimes and it wasn't a big deal. In the end, we had to go mostly with what Mary told police back in 2002, which was fragmented even then. We had a problem of how to present this visually with her memory being so unreliable, so we decided to do this in montage, showing the actual words on the actual pages of testimony. Some people could say it kind of goes against the concept of film being a visual medium. I would argue that these 12 or 13 shots of the black ink on this white paper, this visibly aging paper, showing these words, are intensely visual. This photo that we cut to, you can see that all that was in the room she escaped to in that moment was a stack of Pilates mats and a couple of treadmills. Mary ran for that little closet area we highlighted, which didn't even have a door, and she crouched behind a vacuum cleaner. This was her defense. And then immediately the door blew open. You can see the door lying on the floor very briefly. In these photos from 2002 we see on the screen now, you don't even really see the full extent of the burns she got on her face and neck. The distance from her spot in that one corner and the door was about 20 feet. But in talking to investigators, they were able to confirm that even that would have been the equivalent of standing over an open oven set to about 500 degrees. And the Droitwich came closer from there.
And then you saw it.
Yeah,
How close did it get?
10 feet.
10 feet.
About that.
Do me a favor if you can. Can you close your eyes and then think about when it first saw you? And then count the seconds before it turned and moved back out of the room. And then tell me how long there was eye contact in your estimation.
No, I don't want to do that.
That's okay.
I'll tell you because I think I know. I just don't want to close my eyes.
Fair enough.
8 seconds.
8 full seconds.
Actual seconds. Yeah, not some estimation.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So the debate has gone on for 20 years now why the Droitwich hesitated with Mary and then retreated. Mary and no one else. There's never been any evidence of hesitation with anyone else. And I didn't want to clog up the film with those theories because it takes us too far away from the people the story is about. So we shot interviews on that topic. We shot them at Rutgers University. We shot them at Loyola. Maybe there'll be extras on this DVD. I don't know. But in the end, I just never heard anything convincing. Really, the most convincing theory remains the eye color theory. Mary would have fallen into that grouping. But it's so terrible how little evidence we have even now, 22 years after the Droitwich's first attack and through the 6 that came since, that the eye color theory still doesn't have nearly enough weight or data to it to prove anything. Or the solo kill aversion, which is another possibility that some experts have floated. In the end, though, it was Mary herself who told me off camera that she simply felt she was cursed. I'll never forget her saying that at the end of her driveway. At the time, I thought that was a throwaway comment. I barely gave it a second thought. And then about a month later, when we found out what we did about what happened to her in France years after the Saturday Ministry incident, then that comment came back to me, and it was given a very profound meaning.
I need to take a break here, and I don't feel I should talk over this clip, which is from the very first recorded attack, the Chain of Rocks water treatment plant outside St. Louis in December 1999.
Okay, welcome back. We're picking up a little later in the film. I have to confess I've had a couple of drinks before recording this stretch of commentary because this stretch here, especially with the Lisa stuff, has always gotten to me in a very simple gut punch kind of way. But let's pick up with the stretch of interviews beginning here with Yuko Aratama, the woman who was the first to see something emerging from 120 Cherry that morning, April 27th at just about 10:20. Yuko is standing here right at the intersection where she'd been back in 2002, waiting for a bus. There's no context here, but Yuko had just flown to America for the first time. She was an exchange student. She was starting her work on her master's in civil engineering. She had come to Atlas to stay with a cousin. They'd never even met. April 27th was Yuko's 4th day in America. Over the credits, we will see her pencil rendering of what she saw lurching across the road. She did not actually create this rendering until just about 5 years ago. At age 21, which she was in 2002, she said she had no artistic talent whatsoever. She said she took up sketching a year after the attack, and she's never been sure whether it was maybe that morning of April 27th that stirred something in her, something that needed to be expressed in some way that she didn't yet have within her. And she still sketches today. And here's Lisa again. And I need more drinkies. Just a sec. I have to keep telling myself, even today, how little she and Noah DiLeo really knew each other. Just a couple of conversations in church, and then the one date. And the next time they saw each other, not even any time to catch up, they got to the Saturday ministry at Proud Lake Baptist and were almost immediately in separate rooms with such a long way between them. So it has always seemed unthinkable to me what Noah did. I think of myself at that age, 16, and how wrapped up in myself I was, and I can't seem to make any connection between this kid, Noah, and even the adult I am now. I talked to his parents briefly. They didn't want to go on camera. I think I was trying to uncover that thing that was inside him that sent him out into that center quad, out of the classroom where he seemed safe, out of there, through a window, onto that grassy quad, alone and exposed, because he knew Lisa was over there, and for no other reason. It's not built into our nature at that age to go towards death. Not if you're a teenager in New Jersey who likes building models and playing kickball, and there's no other way to interpret the timeline and the maps and the photographs that Noah knew what he was risking. There were so many people already dead, but he went and he got through the window on that side, and he saw what he saw, and he acted. This was a kid who at 10 o'clock was so worried that he might screw up bringing those refreshments in. He was thinking, oh my gosh, did I buy enough ice? Is the ice for the sodas melting too fast? Did I not bring enough non-sugary stuff because we have 2 diabetics? Same kid. We cut back and forth here for a bit between Noah and Lisa. And now for the first time, we take the camera inside the rebuilt Proud Lake Baptist complex, mixed with some home videos we obtained of what everything looked like between about 1992 and 1999. I remember Noah would give us trail mix when we interviewed him. Iced tea and trail mix. It's funny the things you remember about people. I would look around his apartment and I would get inexplicably sad. And at night I would go home and I would think, of course they should be together today. It's they who should be married to each other. Why shouldn't one beautiful little thing have come out of all this instead of them never having even a second date? And Lisa getting married to someone else, why does it have to be this way and not that way? I came to rationalize it for my own peace of mind by looking at it like, well, they now had the kind of bond that can never be broken. Maybe that's the narrative I can live with. It wasn't meant to be that they should keep dating and fall in love. Maybe that was too normal. It was meant that they have something else that's unseen and unending and mysterious.
Did you know your arm was broken?
No, I didn't. It was numb.
Didn't look down at it?
Maybe I did. I don't remember.
A camper in Nanticoke, Maryland recorded this December 2016.
to have two separate twists, I guess you'd call them, during the filming, especially the documentary, was something I'd never experienced. Mary's came first. We're seeing here the second day of interviews, and she was definitely hungover. We weren't getting very far here. It was not a very good day, as I tried to get a few more details from her about what it was like to see the Droitwich so close and live to tell about it. And as I recall, it was that night that Ben called me up. He'd just been continuing some very conventional background research on everyone we show in the film, nothing terribly invasive, and an old friend of Mary's from back then, who I think didn't like her very much. I'll keep his name confidential. He said to Ben, well, you know about Didier Souza, right? And Ben hadn't. Neither one of us had. This was something that Mary had kept from us. Not an outright lie. She just didn't want to pull that name out from the past, understandably. She had changed her name in 2004, and the French police and the French courts had gone to considerable length to keep her identity secret. So as we talk to her on the screen here, I don't know yet about this chapter of her life. Watching the movie now, to me it's very obvious how distressed she was here. I look at her eyes and I know that she was in the grips of something very dark. But to her credit, she's here and she's answering my questions, and she talks about what one of the victims was screaming as he tried to run away. And originally we thought of naming the film that terrible phrase he was screaming, right down to the broken grammar. There's a monster got in the room. But Mary told us later this day, after we stopped shooting, that she couldn't be sure that's what the words were exactly, so we decided against it. So yes, Ben found out about Didier Souza, and now here we are. This is the exterior of Centre Pénitentiaire du Kef in Brittany, France. Sorry about the pronunciation. This is absolutely the last place in the world I thought we'd wind up shooting this documentary. This day's footage was shot, actually it was the very last shot we ever got for the film, this exterior. I had never been inside a women's prison before, much less in France, and the location of Kef prison is especially strange. It's on the former site of the largest mental hospital in the country until it closed in 1954. The land in the old building looked down on the town from a hill in a very intimidating way. Then when the region needed a location to build the new women's prison, they chose that exact spot, high on the hill. It's a small building in the center courtyard within the walls of the former mental hospital. That's how big it was. And I can't really put into words how dire the atmosphere in that prison is. It's an awful place to be. Ernestine Souza was 24 when she was convicted. She'd been in Kef prison for more than 4 years by this time. In May of 2014, a group of American and Canadian tourists in Toulouse had registered through their hotel to go on a day hiking trip in the countryside, a very common thing. They all went together in a van, 6 people total, including the driver from the hotel. When they got to a small parking area in the woods, there was one other vehicle there, and 3 people immediately got out of it. This was Didier Souza and his brother and his sister, and they abducted the group, drove the van more than an hour away, marched them out through the woods to the struggling family farm. This was a ransom scheme. Didier's older brother, Dom, had been arrested 2 years before for burglary and assault, and he had then died in prison. But what was left of the Souza family, who had all been living together on the farm for several years, they did not believe he had died in prison. They insisted that Dom had in fact been taken away to a secret base somewhere in France as part of a secret program to impregnate humans with alien spawn. This was their belief. They demanded that Dom be returned to them, or their American and Canadian captives would be killed. And by most accounts, Didier's younger sister and younger brother had been relatively stable people. They had no conflicts with the law all their lives until he moved back onto the farm after their parents' death. And slowly they seemed to fall under the spell of his extreme beliefs. and in the end, his complete insanity. The hostage situation stretched on for 6 days. In November of 2014, it was a very famous situation in France. The press, of course, had a field day with it, but they didn't understand then how dark and deranged Didier really was. On the 6th day, when it was obvious he wasn't going to get what he wanted and they'd been isolated and cut off, he ordered his younger brother Luc and his sister Ernestine to take the hostages individually into the woods and kill them. Ernestine refused and snuck off the farm. She intended to find the police and help them intervene. One person who has chosen to live, who was actually let go to make her way through the countryside, all she had to do was promise not to tell anyone where they were, was the woman who had been inexplicably spared in the Saturday ministry incident, Mary Neary.
I want to ask you about the list Didier had made, the list of names and these designations beside them. What did the numbers mean?
Je voudrais vous interroger sur la liste que Didier avait faite, la liste des noms et ses appellations à côté.
C'était l'ordre dans lequel on m'avait dit de le faire.
It was the order that I was told to do it. Didier was worried about some more than others, so he said to do it in a certain order.
Why was Philip Proud given number 1?
Pourquoi Philippe Proud a-t-il été nommé numéro 1?
Parce qu'il était le plus fort et qu'il parlait le plus.
Because he was the strongest and he talked the most.
And then in the middle here we have Mary Neary's name right here, the woman who's now named Mary Neary. But instead of a number we have initials, NTP. What does that mean?
Au milieu, on trouve le nom de Marie Neary, mais au lieu d'un numéro, il y a les initiales NTP. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire?
Ne tuez pas.
Do not kill.
She was singled out on this list for this treatment, NTP. No one else was. Why?
Elle a été choisie sur cette liste pour ce traitement NTP. Personne d'autre ne l'a été. Pourquoi?
Didier n'avait pas les idées claires.
Didier wasn't thinking straight.
Aucun d'entre nous ne l'était.
None of us were.
Il l'aimait bien.
He liked
Il a
her.
dit qu'elle seule lui avait montré de la
He
gentillesse.
said she alone showed him kindness and that she shouldn't be harmed.
I was kind of stumbling around because I couldn't see much. That substance had gotten all over my face and in my eyes. The mess that it sprays out. I could feel my face and my chest burning, and I heard Lisa screaming.
So where was she in relation to the Drotage?
It was distracted by a bunch of sirens and horns that came all at once from the parking lot. She was able to run toward me. She was about, 20 feet away. The horns, I think, distracted it. And so did this man running for the both of us, but the man didn't make it.
So you told the police something about it doing something strange then?
Yeah. For some reason, it started to kind of scream. So loud that it drowned out everything.
What did that sound like?
It was pretty horrible, because it wasn't like anger or pain. It was more like, It was staring down at this poor man on the floor, looking at what it had done to him. And it started to scream like it had some kind of triumph. Like it had gotten everything it wanted and just couldn't hold in its euphoria.
For those listening who don't know, when it feels under assault, the relentless Drotage will reportedly cue a function of its biology, its chemistry. No one who survived April 27th actually saw this happen, but it must have. The evidence was found everywhere. The entire hallway in that part of the building was coated with that black hot substance. The Drotage will essentially inflate its upper limbs. Its ichor will rush into them from the lower part of its body, and then when the limbs reach a point of maximum capacity, and they are utterly distended, which gives the appearance that the Droitwich has almost doubled in size. There is an eruption. It's the only word for it. The limbs are destroyed, and the ichor is released at its highest temperature in every direction, and then the creature has to go into a mode of self-preservation until regeneration of the limbs takes place. But nothing is going to survive that eruption of the pieces of its own self. The substance is lethal until its heat and its acidity can be brought under control artificially, which is what the rescuers did. 2 of the bodies in the hallway could barely be identified. This is the point where we made the choice to truly break from the reality we had established through all these very plainly shot interviews, because what Noah describes next here, the visual image was so powerful to me. I thought maybe it's time in the film for it to become something different, so we went to animation. The woman who created these animations is Stacy Westberg. She's won many awards for her work. I was lucky to get her. We took some artistic liberty here, both in the description of what they looked like back then and what happened inside the building. But in essence, we're seeing what they did. And we were true even to the detail of Noah, how he took a hold of Lisa by the upper arm, not by the hand, but by the upper arm out of desperation, almost like you'd see a bouncer leading someone out of a bar by force. That's how he did it. It was nothing as romantic as pulling her by the hand, and that is shown here. Here we have the animation telling the rest of Noah and Lisa's story in silence, except for the music. He'd lost most of the vision in his left eye at that point. There's a photo of his face a reporter took. You can see it online. Lisa was their guide for the last 100 feet. She made the final, very smart split-second judgment to double back and head through the north exit, guiding him. The deceptive effect that Noah experienced when the hallway was dark because of the dust clouds that were created from the portion of the roof collapsing was a totally freak thing. What had happened was that there was a police vehicle that had been parked across the street. It had only gotten there 60 seconds before. And the sun had finally shaken loose of the clouds a bit and reached a certain angle where it reflected very dramatically and powerfully, almost blindingly, off one of the mirrors. And it shone this intense square of light toward Noah, and he pulled Lisa toward that. For a second, he thought it was some kind of exit light in the darkness. But it was only a single optic showing through an open window, just briefly. And here, Stacy Westberg draws that effect in a very powerful way, with Noah and Lisa looking so young, rowing across the surface of this dark, roiling sea with the red sky over them, and they see a beacon on land drawing them their way of escape. But they have to contend with these terrible waves to get there.
I left my house on Monday night. It must have been about midnight. I convinced myself I could find the Droitwich. I was so stressed out and so drunk. I would go out. I would take my brother's shotgun, and I'd get in the car and head for the Pine Barrens. I was convinced I was going to jail, so I decided I was going to be a hero. It sounds completely ridiculous, but that was my mind that night.
So what we did here was take the camera out into the woods at night. We tried to find the spot roughly where Bill Savoy went that night in 2002, and it wasn't looking good at all. It had been so many years, and he'd been so drunk. And we wound up going up and down this fire road. These are the Pine Barrens of South New Jersey on the screen here. So vast and empty. Bill was convinced we were on the right track, but going twice up and down this road with just the fog lights wasn't getting us anywhere. But finally he said, pull over, which we did, into a ditch basically, because he had recognized impossible as it seemed, he'd recognized the entrance to this tiny cemetery in the woods, just about 10 graves. It was a Civil War cemetery, totally overgrown. And we got out, and he said that was where he had started walking randomly for about an hour with the shotgun. He was sobering up. He wound up doing this big, wide loop in this spot. And about the halfway point, he heard the sound that he begins to talk about here. But he had trouble describing it, so we cut that part out. So what I did was access this vast sound effects library through Triad Packed Pictures. And I wanted to play for Bill about a dozen sounds, kind of like what he was trying to describe. And on the third or fourth cut, he said, "That's it. That's what I heard." This is not in the movie. We decided it was more effective to just let the camera wander here through the woods silently, so dark. Which brings us thematically back to the sequence near the beginning when we were wandering inside 120 Cherry Road. In that moment when Bill heard that sound, all alone at about 2 in the morning, 10 miles outside town, deep in the Pine Barrens, he told me he was convinced that Droitwich was near, that this 1 in a million chance was real. And then he began to run. Hello, everyone. We're doing a bit of a real-life jump cut here. The last one will do, I think. It is now 3 weeks after I recorded the first part of this DVD commentary. It's October 12th. I wanted to take some time and think about what I've said on this recording so far. Something has happened out here in the real world which understandably made me pause. 3 weeks ago in Grand Junction, Colorado, a family visited an old house they had inherited from a relative, the husband's grandmother, a house in the country. So this family of 4 drove out just to appraise what repairs would need to be done to sell the place. It wasn't in very habitable condition, but they did intend to stay the whole weekend there. Out back, well behind the house, in a patch of weeds, was an old Landhorn RV from the 70s, totally in disrepair, up on blocks, basically. No one had touched it in years. Maybe the seats and the tabletop inside it had been pulled out long ago by a neighbor. He'd bought them for $20. So the mother and father told their 2 children not to go near the RV. They made it off limits for the weekend because who knew what sort of injury they could get inside that big old thing. The Lamparts, that's the family's name.
Did you have any idea your friend Charlotte kept this all these years?
I know she was a total pack rat, but not to that extent, no.
Do you remember the whole context?
Not really.
How about Benjamin Kidder? Any recollections?
No. Not since, junior year. I started going to MacArthur.
You wrote, "I'm so mad that Benjamin wasn't at the movie. Noah got it totally wrong. We showed up and suddenly it was like a date. Benjamin wasn't there, and neither was his sister. I think Noah got some stuff wrong. Real convenient."
You know, just kids being kids. I just don't know what the point is of going all the way back to that.
To give a snapshot of what happened a couple of days before the attack.
I think you want it all to be something it just never was. And that's why you keep coming back to it.
No, absolutely not. You wrote, "Noah's sweet, but he's definitely D.N.K. Now I still don't know how I'm going to get Benjamin to ask me out." D.N.K. What's D.N.K.?
just some little term we would say, talking about which boys we liked for dating and which ones we didn't.
But what do the letters stand for?
I'm sure Charlotte already told you.
No, I didn't ask her.
Do not kiss.
6 months after their interviews were shot for the film, Mary Neary called Bill Savoy on the phone. She found him and called him, having never met him. She'd just read about him in some article connected to the making of the documentary. And she called just to express her empathy. They met, and the next I heard, they'd gotten involved. Romantically, but not in a very traditional sense. The two people in the film who I literally had dreams about being together never would be, never will be, but Bill and Mary somehow connected. And I think they came to each other at exactly the necessary moment in their lives. They found each other in the nick of time, maybe. Bill told me about a time last year when he and Mary were just walking around town together. They tended to be outdoors a lot in places with a lot of people, understandably. Even though Bill was nowhere near Proud Lake Baptist on April 27 of 2002, in recent years he developed a deep, growing fear of enclosures and dimly lit places. They walked through a barbecue festival or something, and some guy kept standing too close to Mary behind her in a soda line. And she turned on this guy and was verbally vicious to him at random. It really stunned Bill. And he told me he wrestled with that for days, thinking of how the two of them were going to deal with each other's pain day after day. It didn't seem like it could work. And he found himself at one point standing in front of 120 Cherry Road, the very busy building that replaced the one he had owned long ago. And he went in, he forced himself to climb up to the 5th floor. There's 7 floors now, all filled up. And he went into the men's room next to a dental lab up there. And he looked at himself in the mirror, just stood there. And he started saying to himself over and over again the word relentless. Relentless. He decided that their best chance to kill the thing that had been hiding in that building was for he and Mary to keep waking up together day after day and to never stop. At about 10 o'clock on the first night of the Lampard family's stay at their new country house in Grand Junction, the little boy, Jesse, heard a sound from outside, and he went to tell his father about it, but it never came back. So the man, Adam Lampard, decided it was a lovely night to show his son the stars and take him out to where the grass was so tall, show him some nature. He saw that there was a pond out behind that old dinosaur of a Landhorn RV, maybe 50 yards beyond it. He hadn't known about it. Just a very small pond, maybe the size of a golf green. Very still water. And they saw ducks sleeping beside it. And Adam Lampard said to his wife, "Hey, maybe we should stay."
I don't know what the end game is. It's a tough question. You just try to share some true stories with people who wouldn't find them otherwise, I guess.
See, the one thing you never really have to deal with on your end is that day when you're sitting on your couch and like you're cruising around the channels. You know how every channel now has these rows and rows of little pictures? The title of each thing. There's hundreds and hundreds of little boxes, and one day out of the blue it happens. You know, you spot the story that you were part of personally. You've got the remote there and you're trying to find some funny movie to watch or some some Tom Cruise thing, and instead you see that title and it's like, oh well, your life is, it's just on the pile with all the other stories. The assembly line just keeps pumping, you know, and you're just this little square. People are flipping past because it doesn't look grabby enough to pull them in. I'm not saying you should feel guilty about it, but like all this effort with the lights and cameras and such, that's how all this stuff winds up. That's about as far away from understanding the truth of people's experience as you can get.
I'm scared of the Droitwich, as I believe I have said. Fairly recently, I talked to an Oxford professor who was really scared of flying, really scared. And he said to me, you can talk about odds all you want, how safe it is. Of course, we all know that. But what if the universe doesn't work the way we think? What if the thing we're most afraid of is in our own individual reality that we live in and that no one else truly sees or touches? What if that's how each of us will die? By this man's logic, if that's the case, then it's the Droitwich who will somehow find me one day, a 1 in a billion chance, find me in a vulnerable moment out on the trail maybe, and sense me from a ravine where it's hiding, stalk me, burn me, scissor me to pieces. The more I think about this professor's theory, the more it makes a kind of strange, very elemental sense. Crawling, lurching, sleeping its life away. It's the Droitwich I think about, because no one can answer the question, where is it now? And the end music takes us out. We don't have to be with these people anymore.